It was a quiet Tuesday evening, and the sun had just begun to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The roads were calm, with only a few cars passing by as Sarah Johnson drove home from work. She was an unassuming woman in her early 30s, dressed casually in a simple blouse and jeans. To anyone who saw her, she looked like any other person heading home after a long day. But Sarah wasn't ordinary. Beneath her calm exterior lay a life filled with secrets that even her closest friends didn't know. By day, Sarah worked as a data analyst at a tech company, crunching numbers and analyzing trends. It was a job that seemed perfectly normal, even mundane. But when the clock struck 5 and she left the office, her real work began. Sarah was no ordinary civilian. She was one of the CIA's most skilled operatives. Her missions took her across the globe, infiltrating dangerous organizations, gathering intelligence, and preventing threats before they could materialize. Yet, tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, she just wanted to get home, unwind, and maybe watch an episode of her favorite show before bed. As she cruised down a quiet stretch of highway, the soft hum of jazz music filled her car. Sarah tapped her fingers lightly on the steering wheel, lost in thought. She wasn't thinking about classified files or covert operations. Instead, her mind wandered to simpler things. What she would cook for dinner, whether she should call her mom, and how nice it felt to be driving through such peaceful surroundings. For once, her life felt almost normal. But then, without warning, blue and red lights flashed behind her. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She checked her speedometer. She wasn't speeding. She glanced at the rearview mirror, trying to figure out what had caught the attention of the police officer now pulling her over. She hadn't run a red light, ignored a stop sign, or done anything reckless. Still, she followed protocol, signaling and pulling over to the side of the road. As she rolled down her window, her mind raced. Was this some kind of misunderstanding? Or could it have something to do with her other life, the one hidden beneath layers of secrecy? A tall police officer approached her car, his face stern and unreadable. His hand rested lightly on the holster of his gun, a detail Sarah noted immediately. "License and registration," he demanded curtly, his tone leaving little room for negotiation. Sarah complied without hesitation, reaching into her glove compartment for the documents. She handed them over with a polite smile, doing her best to appear calm and cooperative. Inside, however, her thoughts were racing. Why had she been pulled over, and why did the officer seem so suspicious? The officer glanced at her license, then back at her face, his expression unchanged. "Do you know how fast you were going?" he asked, though there was no conviction in his voice. It was clear this wasn't about speeding. Something else was going on here. Sarah shook her head slightly. "I don't believe I was speeding, officer," she replied, keeping her tone respectful. "If there's an issue, I'd appreciate it if you could let me know." Instead of answering, the officer began circling her car, peering into the windows as if searching for something incriminating. Sarah's stomach tightened. She knew all too well how these situations could escalate, especially for someone who looked like her. Black women were often subjected to unnecessary scrutiny during traffic stops, and Sarah had experienced her fair share of bias in the past. But this time felt different. There was an edge to the officer's demeanor, a hint of hostility mixed with suspicion that made her uneasy. While the officer continued his inspection, Sarah's phone buzzed faintly in her pocket, a secure message from headquarters. She ignored it, knowing better than to draw attention to herself. But the officer noticed the vibration. "What's that?" he snapped, pointing at her jacket. Before she could respond, another set of headlights appeared in the distance, pulling up behind the patrol car. A second officer stepped out, younger and more eager, clearly ready to assist or escalate the situation. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself. She recognized the signs of profiling all too well. This wasn't just a routine traffic stop. The older officer's behavior suggested he was looking for trouble where none existed. As they exchanged hushed words near their vehicles, Sarah debated her next move. Should she reveal her identity, Pull rank? No, not yet. She needed to assess the situation carefully. For now, she remained silent, her hands resting calmly on the steering wheel, her mind calculating every possible outcome. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. The officers conferred quietly, occasionally glancing toward Sarah's car. Finally, the older cop returned, his tone even harsher than before. "We're going to need you to step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Sarah's stomach tightened further, but she masked her unease with practiced composure. "Is there a reason for this?" she asked calmly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "No questions," he barked, motioning for her to comply. Reluctantly, Sarah opened the door and stepped onto the pavement. The cool night air brushed against her skin, sharpening her focus. She scanned the area subtly, noting the layout of the scene and potential exits. If things escalated further, she'd need to act quickly and decisively. But then something unexpected happened. The younger officer spoke up, his voice hesitant but firm. "Sir, maybe we should check her records first, just to be sure." The older man shot him a glare, but the delay gave Sarah a crucial moment to intervene. "Look," she said evenly, meeting the older officer's gaze. "I understand you're doing your job, but I haven't broken any laws. Let's resolve this peacefully." Her words carried authority, though neither officer realized just how much weight they held. Behind the scenes, wheels were already turning. Back at headquarters, Sarah's absence hadn't gone unnoticed. When her secure line went silent during what should have been routine communication, alarms were raised. Within minutes, a team was dispatched to locate her. They traced her GPS signal to the roadside stop and mobilized immediately. Unbeknownst to Sarah, backup was on its way. Not local law enforcement, but federal agents armed with the power to shut down entire operations if necessary. As the standoff continued, the tension grew thicker. The older officer paced around Sarah's car, muttering under his breath, while the younger one looked increasingly conflicted. Sensing the growing instability, Sarah decided to push harder. "Officer," she said firmly, "if you're looking for evidence, go ahead and search my car. You won't find anything illegal because I haven't done anything wrong." Her confidence unnerved him, but pride kept him from backing down. That's when the sound of approaching sirens broke the silence. Two black SUVs screeched to a halt, behind the patrol cars blocking the road. Men in suits emerged, badges flashing as they approached the scene. One of them locked eyes with Sarah, nodding slightly. It was Agent Marks, her direct superior. Without wasting a moment, he addressed the officers. "Gentlemen, I suggest you stand down. This is a matter of national security." The officers froze. Confusion etched across their faces. The younger one instinctively took a step back while the older one puffed out his chest defensively. "Who are you people?" he demanded, though his voice wavered. Agent Marks ignored him, turning, instead to Sarah. "Are you all right?" he asked, his tone softening. She nodded, exhaling deeply for the first time since the ordeal began. "I'm fine," she assured him. Then, addressing the officers, Marks continued, "This woman is a high-ranking operative within the Central Intelligence Agency. Any interference with her activities constitutes obstruction of justice. Do I make myself clear?" The gravity of the situation finally dawned on the officers. Their bravado melted away, replaced by palpable fear. We didn't know," the older one stammered, fumbling with his hat. "She didn't say anything." Marks cut him off sharply. "That's because she follows protocol, and so should you. Now pack up your gear and leave. We'll handle the rest." With the officers dismissed, the tension dissipated, leaving behind an eerie calm. As the SUVs drove away, Sarah sat silently in the passenger seat, staring out the window. Her thoughts churned, not with anger, but with frustration. How many others had faced such treatment without the luxury of federal intervention? How many innocent lives had been disrupted, shattered, or worse because of systemic biases? Agent Marks broke the silence. "You handled that well," he remarked, glancing at her briefly before focusing back on the road. Sarah shrugged, her expression unreadable. "It shouldn't have happened in the first place," she replied quietly. "And it keeps happening. Every single day." Though the incident was over, its impact lingered. For Sarah, it reinforced the importance of her dual roles, not just as an operative, but as someone who could shine a light on injustices others might overlook. And for the officers involved, it served as a stark reminder that assumptions can have far-reaching consequences. In the end, the world moved on, oblivious to the quiet battles fought beneath its surface. But for those who understood, stories, like Sarah's, were a call to action, a plea for change in a system desperately in need of reform. As Sarah stood outside her car, the cool night air wrapping around her like an invisible shroud, she couldn't shake the feeling that this situation was spiraling out of control. The older officer's suspicious glare and clipped tone made it clear he wasn't interested in reason or facts. His younger partner, on the other hand, seemed torn, caught between following orders and questioning whether this stop was justified. For Sarah, every second felt like an eternity, each one amplifying the tension hanging thick in the air. The older officer took a step closer to Sarah, his eyes narrowing as if trying to uncover some hidden truth about her. "What kind of work do you do?" he asked abruptly, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. It was a loaded question, one designed to provoke rather than inform. Sarah hesitated for only a fraction of a second before responding with practiced calmness. "I'm a data analyst," she said, her tone polite but firm. She didn't elaborate further. There was no need to complicate things unnecessarily. After all, being a data analyst wasn't exactly a lie, it was just part of who she was. Her answer didn't satisfy the officer. He frowned, clearly expecting something more dramatic or incriminating. Instead of pressing her directly, he turned his attention to her car. Leaning down slightly, he peered into the windows, scanning the interior as though searching for evidence of wrongdoing. Sarah watched him carefully, her mind racing. She knew her car was clean, no weapons, no classified documents, nothing that could raise suspicion. But she also knew appearances could be deceiving. To someone looking for trouble, even an empty water bottle on the passenger seat might seem suspicious. While the officer inspected her vehicle, Sarah's phone buzzed faintly in her pocket, a secure message from headquarters. She ignored it, knowing better than to draw attention to herself during such a delicate moment. Phones were often seen as distractions, or worse, excuses, for officers who wanted to escalate situations unnecessarily. Still, the buzzing caught the older officer's attention. "What's that?" he snapped, pointing at her jacket. Before Sarah could respond, another set of headlights appeared in the distance, pulling up behind the patrol car. A second police cruiser arrived, its engine idling softly as a younger officer stepped out. The new arrival looked uncertain, glancing between Sarah and his superior before joining them near her car. "Everything okay here, sir?" he asked tentatively. The older officer waved him off dismissively. "Just routine checks," he muttered, though his body language suggested otherwise. Sarah noticed the younger officer's hesitation. Unlike his colleague, he didn't seem eager to jump into confrontation. In fact, he almost looked uncomfortable, as if he sensed something wasn't quite right about the situation. Sarah decided to seize the opportunity. Taking a deep breath, she addressed the older officer once again. "Officer," she began, her voice steady and measured, "if you're concerned about anything in my car, feel free to search it. I have nothing to hide because I haven't done anything wrong." Her words carried authority, though neither officer realized just how much weight they held. To them, she was simply a woman attempting to de-escalate a tense situation. But beneath the surface, Sarah was calculating every possible outcome. If things got worse, she'd need to act quickly and decisively. The older officer scowled, clearly irritated by her composure. He exchanged a few hushed words with the younger one, their conversation too quiet for Sarah to hear. Whatever they discussed, it did little to ease the tension. Meanwhile, back at CIA headquarters, alarms had already been raised. When Sarah's secure line went silent during what should have been routine communication, Her absence triggered immediate concern. Within minutes, a team was dispatched to locate her. They traced her GPS signal to the roadside stop and mobilized without delay. Unbeknownst to Sarah, backup was on its way. Not local law enforcement, but federal agents armed with the power to shut down entire operations if necessary. As the standoff continued, the older officer grew increasingly agitated. He paced around Sarah's car, muttering under his breath while occasionally shooting her sideways glances. The younger officer, however, seemed conflicted. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Finally, unable to remain silent any longer, he spoke up. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "maybe we should check her records first, just to be sure." The older officer shot him a glare, but the interruption gave Sarah a crucial moment to intervene. "Look," she said evenly, meeting the older officer's gaze head-on. "I understand you're doing your job, but I haven't broken any laws. Let's resolve this peacefully." Her confidence unnerved him, but pride kept him from backing down entirely. That's when the sound of approaching sirens broke the silence. Two black SUVs screeched to a halt behind the patrol cars, blocking the road completely. Men in suits emerged, badges flashing as they approached the scene with purposeful strides. One of the agents locked eyes with Sarah, nodding slightly. It was Agent Marks, her direct superior. Without wasting a moment, he addressed the officers. "Gentlemen, I suggest you stand down. This is a matter of national security." His tone left no room for argument, and the gravity of his words hit the officers like a freight train. The younger one instinctively took a step back, while the older one puffed out his chest defensively. "Who are you people?" he demanded, though his voice wavered noticeably. Agent Marks ignored him, turning instead to Sarah. "Are you all right?" he asked, his tone softening ever so slightly. Sarah nodded, exhaling deeply for the first time since the ordeal began. "I'm fine," she assured him. Then, addressing the officers, Marks continued. "This woman is a high-ranking operative within the Central Intelligence Agency. Any interference with her activities constitutes obstruction of justice. Do I make myself clear?" The realization dawned on the officers slowly, their bravado melting away as fear replaced it. We didn't know," the older one stammered, fumbling with his hat. "She didn't say anything." Marks cut him off sharply. "That's because she follows protocol, and so should you. Now pack up your gear and leave. We'll handle the rest." With the officers dismissed, the tension dissipated, leaving behind an eerie calm. As the SUVs drove away, Sarah sat silently in the passenger seat, staring out the window. Her thoughts churned, not with anger but with frustration. How many others had faced such treatment without the luxury of federal intervention? How many innocent lives had been disrupted, shattered, or worse, because of systemic biases? Agent Marks broke the silence. "You handled that well," he remarked, glancing at her briefly before focusing back on the road. Sarah shrugged, her expression unreadable. "It shouldn't have happened in the first place," she replied quietly. "And it keeps happening, every single day." Though the incident was over, its impact lingered. For Sarah, it reinforced the importance of her dual roles, not just as an operative, but as someone who could shine a light on injustices others might overlook. And for the officers involved, it served as a stark reminder that assumptions can have far-reaching consequences. In the end, the world moved on, oblivious to the quiet battles fought beneath its surface. But for those who understood, stories, like Sarah's, were a call to action, a plea for change in a system desperately in need of reform. Sarah's experience that evening stayed with her long after the lights of the city faded into the distance. As she reflected on the events of the night, she couldn't help but think about the countless individuals who didn't have the resources or support she did. For them, traffic stops like this weren't just inconvenient. They were dangerous. They carried the weight of prejudice, fear, and sometimes even violence. Sarah resolved then and there to use her position not only to serve her country, but also to advocate for those whose voices were often silenced. Agent Marks glanced at her, Again, sensing the depth of her thoughts. "You all right?" he asked gently. Sarah nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah," she said softly. "Just thinking about how much work still needs to be done." Marks nodded knowingly. "We'll get there," he replied. "One step at a time." And with that, they drove on into the night, two figures navigating a world filled with shadows, but determined to bring light wherever they could. The tension between Sarah and the officers grew thicker with each passing moment. The older officer's pacing around her car was relentless, his boots crunching against the gravel as he circled it again and again. His younger partner stood awkwardly nearby, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, clearly unsure of what to do next. For Sarah, the situation felt surreal, like a scene from a movie where the protagonist is caught in an impossible predicament. But this wasn't a movie. This was real life, and the stakes were higher than anyone else at the scene realized. "Step away from the vehicle," the older officer commanded sharply, pointing toward the front of Sarah's car. His tone left no room for negotiation. Reluctantly, Sarah complied, moving slowly so as not to provoke him further. She kept her hands visible, resting them lightly on the hood of her car as instructed. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let her fear show. Years of training had taught her how to stay calm under pressure, even when the odds seemed stacked against her. As she stood there, the younger officer finally spoke up again. "Sir, maybe we should run her info first," he suggested, his voice hesitant but firm. The older officer shot him a glare that could have melted steel. "I know what I'm doing," he snapped, dismissing the suggestion entirely. Sarah noticed the flicker of doubt in the younger man's eyes. He looked conflicted, torn between loyalty to his superior and a growing sense of unease about the situation. It was clear he didn't fully trust the direction things were heading. Meanwhile, back at CIA headquarters, alarms continued to blare. When Sarah's secure line went silent during what should have been routine communication, it triggered an immediate response. A team of agents was already en route to locate her. They traced her GPS signal to the roadside stop and mobilized without delay. Unbeknownst to Sarah, or the officers, the cavalry was coming. Federal agents armed with badges, authority, and resources far beyond those of local law enforcement were closing in fast. Back at the scene, the older officer returned to Sarah, his demeanor more aggressive now. "You sure you're just a data analyst?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. Sarah met his gaze steadily, refusing to flinch. "Yes, sir," she replied calmly. "That's my job." Her answer only seemed to irritate him further. He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "Then why does your license say you live in D.C.? People don't just drive through here unless they're up to something." Sarah's mind raced. She knew better than to argue or volunteer information unnecessarily. Instead, she chose her words carefully. "I visit family in the area sometimes," she explained, keeping her tone neutral. "Tonight I'm just heading home after work." It wasn't a lie, it was simply an incomplete truth. Still, the officer didn't seem convinced. He exchanged another glance with his partner, who remained silent but increasingly uncomfortable. The standoff dragged on, with neither side willing to budge. Sarah's phone buzzed faintly in her pocket once more, a reminder of the world waiting for her beyond this roadside confrontation. She ignored it, knowing better than to draw attention to herself. Phones often became flashpoints in situations like this, especially when officers were looking for excuses to escalate tensions. But the buzzing didn't go unnoticed by the older officer. "What's that?" he demanded again, his voice rising slightly. Before Sarah could respond, headlights appeared in the distance, pulling up behind the patrol cars. Two black SUVs screeched to a halt, their engines rumbling softly as men in suits stepped out. Badges flashed in the dim light as they approached the scene with purposeful strides. One of them locked eyes with Sarah immediately, a subtle nod confirming their arrival. It was Agent Marks, her direct superior. Without hesitation, he addressed the officers. "Gentlemen, stand down. This is a matter of national security." The impact of his words hit the officers like a freight train. The younger one, instinctively, took a step back, while the older one puffed out his chest defensively. "Who are you people?" he demanded, though his voice wavered noticeably. Agent Marks ignored him, turning instead to Sarah. "Are you all right?" he asked, his tone softening ever so slightly. Sarah nodded, exhaling deeply for the first time since the ordeal began. "I'm fine," she assured him. Turning back to the officers, Marks continued, his voice steely and authoritative. "This woman is a high-ranking operative within the Central Intelligence Agency. Any interference with her activities constitutes obstruction of justice. Do I make myself clear?" The gravity of the situation finally dawned on the officers. Their bravado melted away, replaced by palpable fear. We didn't know," the older one stammered, fumbling with his hat. "She didn't say anything," Marks cut him off sharply. "That's because she follows protocol, and so should you. Now pack up your gear and leave. We'll handle the rest." The officers hesitated briefly before complying, their movements hurried and clumsy as they retreated to their vehicles. Within moments, the patrol cars sped away, leaving Sarah and the federal agents alone on the quiet stretch of road. With the immediate threat neutralized, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The agents gathered around Sarah, ensuring she was unharmed and gathering details about the incident. Agent Marks placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You handled that well," he remarked, his expression a mix of pride and concern. Sarah shrugged, her emotions guarded. "It shouldn't have happened in the first place," she replied quietly. "And it keeps happening every single day." Her words carried weight, not just for herself but for countless others who face similar treatment without the luxury of federal intervention. For many, traffic stops like this weren't mere inconveniences. They were dangerous encounters fraught with bias, fear, and sometimes violence. Sarah knew she was fortunate to have backup arrive in time, but she couldn't shake the frustration bubbling inside her. How many others hadn't been so lucky? How many lives had been disrupted, or worse, because of systemic injustices? "Agent," Mark seemed to sense the depth of her thoughts. "We'll get there," he said gently, his tone laced with determination. "One step at a time." Sarah nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah," she murmured. "But until then, we can't afford to look away." As the agents escorted her back to her car, Sarah took a moment to collect herself. She glanced at the empty road ahead, illuminated only by the faint glow of streetlights. The night air was cool and crisp, carrying with it a sense of quiet resolve. Despite everything that had happened, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her dual roles, as a data analyst and a covert operative, had always been about serving her country. But tonight, she realized they could also serve a greater mission, shining a light on injustices that too often went unnoticed. The drive back to headquarters was quiet, the hum of the SUV's engine blending with the soft rustle of leaves outside. Sarah sat silently, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. Agent Marks glanced at her occasionally, sensing the weight of her thoughts. "You did good tonight," he said, finally breaking the silence. "Not just handling the situation, but staying calm under pressure. Not everyone could have done that." Sarah nodded absently, her mind still processing the events of the evening. "Thanks," she replied softly. "But it shouldn't have come to this. None of it should have happened." Mark sighed, leaning back slightly in his seat. "You're right," he admitted. "But change doesn't happen overnight. What we can do is keep pushing forward, making noise where it matters, standing up for what's right." By the time they reached headquarters, Sarah felt a little lighter, though the ache of frustration lingered. As she stepped out of the SUV, she paused for a moment, glancing up at the building's towering silhouette. It was a symbol of power, authority, and responsibility, a reminder of the work that lay ahead. For Sarah, this incident wasn't just a close call. It was a wake-up call. She resolved then and there to use her position not only to protect her country, but also to advocate for those whose voices were often silenced. Inside the building, the agents debriefed quickly, reviewing the details of the traffic stop and discussing potential follow-ups. Sarah listened intently, offering insights wherever necessary. But her mind kept drifting back to the officers' faces, their initial suspicion, their eventual fear, and the realization that they'd crossed a line they didn't even realize existed. For Sarah, it was a stark reminder of how far society still had to go in addressing systemic biases. As the meeting wrapped up, Agent Marks approached her one last time. "Get some rest," he advised, his tone gentle yet firm. "You've earned it." Sarah smiled faintly, nodding in agreement. "I will," she promised. "But tomorrow we start planning. There's too much at stake to stay silent, and—" With that, she turned and walked away, her steps steady and determined. The night may have been long, but Sarah knew the fight was far from over. In a world filled with shadows, she was determined to bring light, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved justice. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling the weight of the previous night's events pressing down on her. Though she had managed to get a few hours of restless sleep, her mind kept replaying the scene over and over again. The flashing lights, the suspicious glares, the tension that crackled in the air like static electricity. She stared at the ceiling for a while, letting her thoughts settle before finally getting out of bed. Today was going to be different. Today, she decided, wouldn't just be about moving forward with her life. It would also be about taking action. After a quick shower and a cup of coffee, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, pulling out her laptop. She opened a secure line connected directly to CIA headquarters, typing out a detailed report of the traffic stop. Every detail mattered: the officers' behavior, their questions, the way they scrutinized her without cause. As she typed, she felt a mix of emotions swirling inside. Her frustration, anger, but also determination. This wasn't just about her. It was about the countless others who faced similar treatment every day. Her report wasn't just documentation. It was evidence. Evidence of a system that needed change. By mid-morning, Sarah arrived at headquarters, her usual calm demeanor masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. She walked briskly through the corridors, nodding politely to colleagues as she made her way to Agent Mark's office. He was waiting for her, seated behind his desk with a stack of files spread out in front of him. When he saw her, he gestured for her to take a seat. "Morning," he said, his tone casual but laced with concern. "How are you holding up?" Sarah shrugged, setting her bag down beside her chair. "I've been better," she admitted, leaning back slightly. "But I'm okay. Last night got me thinking, though. We can't let something like this slide, not when it happens so often." Marks nodded thoughtfully, folding his hands on the desk. "You're right," he agreed. "What happened to you is unacceptable and we need to address it. But it's not going to be easy. These kinds of issues run deep." He paused, studying her face carefully. "Still, if anyone can push for change, it's you. You've got the platform, the credibility, and most importantly, the drive." Sarah took a deep breath, considering his words. She knew he was right. Change wouldn't come overnight. But that didn't mean she couldn't start chipping away at the problem. "I want to propose something," she said finally, her voice steady, despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "We should use this incident as a case study, not just internally within the agency, but externally too. If we present it properly, we might be able to highlight the systemic biases that lead to situations like mine." Marks raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on," he encouraged. "What if we collaborate with advocacy groups?" Sarah continued, her confidence growing as she spoke. "Organizations that focus on racial profiling and police accountability. They could help us amplify the message, reach people outside our bubble, and maybe, just maybe, we can start a conversation that leads to real reform." Marks leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed by her initiative. "That's bold," he said after a moment. "But it could work. The CIA doesn't usually step into public debates like this, but given your unique position and the fact that national security was involved, we might have some leverage here." He tapped his pen against the desk thoughtfully. "Let me talk to the higher-ups, see what they think. In the meantime, keep working on your report. Make sure it's thorough. We'll need all the details if we're going to make a strong case." Sarah nodded, feeling a spark of hope ignite within her. For the first time since the traffic stop, she felt like she was doing more than just surviving the aftermath. She was fighting back, in her own way, using the tools and resources available to her. As she left Marks's office, she couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about justice for herself, it was about justice for everyone. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into her work with renewed vigor. She spent hours refining her report, cross-referencing it with data from other incidents involving racial profiling during traffic stops. She reached out to contacts within advocacy groups, sharing her story cautiously but openly. To her surprise, many were eager to help, recognizing the potential impact of having someone like her, a high-ranking operative, speak out publicly. One evening, after a long day of meetings and phone calls, Sarah found herself sitting in her living room, scrolling through social media. She stumbled upon a post from one of the advocacy groups she'd been collaborating with. It was a simple graphic, featuring statistics about racial profiling and a call to action. Enough is enough. Stand up. Speak out. Beneath it, hundreds of comments poured in from people sharing their own stories of injustice. Some recounted harrowing encounters with law enforcement. Others expressed solidarity and support. Reading through them, Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. These weren't just numbers or headlines. They were real people, real lives affected by prejudice and bias. Inspired by what she saw, Sarah decided to draft an op-ed. Writing under a pseudonym to protect her identity, she poured her heart into the piece. She wrote about her experience being pulled over, the fear and frustration she felt, and the realization that she was one of the lucky ones. She ended the article with a plea for change, urging readers to demand accountability and transparency from law enforcement agencies. Once finished, she sent it to the advocacy group, trusting them to publish it where it would reach the widest audience possible. The response was overwhelming. Within hours of the op-ed going live, it went viral. Thousands of people shared it, commented on it, and discussed it across various platforms. Journalists picked up the story, sparking debates about racial profiling and police misconduct. Lawmakers began calling for hearings, and advocacy groups organized rallies in cities nationwide. What started as a single woman's experience had snowballed into a movement, a collective cry for justice. Back at headquarters, Agent Marks called Sarah into his office once again. This time, however, his expression was one of pride rather than concern. "You did it," he said simply, handing her a printout of the op-ed. "This is making waves. People are listening. Even the director has taken notice." Sarah smiled faintly, though humility tempered her satisfaction. "It's not about me," she replied softly. "It's about everyone who's been through something similar, or worse. If my story can help shine a light on the bigger issue, then it's worth it." Marks nodded, his respect for her evident. "Well, whatever happens next, know that you've already made a difference, and we'll stand by you every step of the way." As Sarah left his office, she felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The road ahead was long, filled with challenges and obstacles she couldn't yet foresee. But for now, she allowed herself a small moment of triumph. Change was slow, but it was happening, and she was part of it. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Sarah reflected on everything that had transpired. From the tense roadside confrontation to the viral op-ed, it had been a whirlwind of emotions and actions. Yet, through it all, one thing remained clear. Silence was no longer an option. For Sarah, this was only the beginning. The momentum from Sarah's op-ed continued to build, spreading like wildfire across the country. By the end of the week, her story had become a national talking point. News outlets covered it extensively, framing it as both an alarming example of racial profiling and a powerful call to action. Social media buzzed with hashtags like "Enough is Enough" and "Justice for All," drawing attention not only to Sarah's experience, but also to countless other stories of injustice. For many, Sarah's voice felt different. It wasn't just another victim sharing their pain. It was someone with authority, credibility, and influence speaking out against systemic bias. Despite the growing support, Sarah knew the backlash wouldn't be far behind. And she was right. Within days, critics began attacking her story, questioning her motives and even accusing her of exaggerating the incident for publicity. Some argued that because she worked for the CIA, her perspective couldn't possibly represent the average person's experience. Others dismissed her entirely, claiming her high-profile status shielded her from real consequences. The comment sections on articles about her were filled with vitriol, and late-night talk show hosts made jokes at her expense. But Sarah refused to let the negativity derail her mission. She understood that resistance was inevitable. Change rarely came without pushback. Instead of retreating, she leaned into the controversy, using it as fuel to keep pushing forward. During a private meeting with Agent Marks, she discussed how to handle the criticism strategically. "They're trying to discredit me," she said firmly, her jaw tight with resolve. "But we can turn this around. If they want to focus on who I am, let's make sure they see the bigger picture too." Marks nodded, impressed by her determination. "You've got guts," he admitted. "Most people would fold under this kind of pressure. But you're doubling down." He paused, tapping his pen thoughtfully against the desk. "What's your next move?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "I want to meet with lawmakers," she declared, face to face. "Let them hear my story directly, not through headlines or sound bites, but from me. If we can get key decision-makers on board, maybe we can push for meaningful policy changes." Her idea was bold, but Marks agreed it could work. With his help, Sarah arranged meetings with several influential members of Congress, including senators and representatives known for advocating civil rights reform. These weren't easy conversations. They required Sarah to relive the humiliation and fear of being pulled over, to explain why such incidents mattered beyond her own life. But she did so with grace and conviction, making it clear that her goal wasn't personal vindication but systemic transformation. One particularly memorable meeting took place in the office of Senator Rachel Hayes, a staunch advocate for criminal justice reform. As Sarah recounted her experience, Hayes listened intently, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. When Sarah finished, the senator leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you for coming forward," Hayes said finally. "Stories like yours are exactly why we need to overhaul our policing practices. But I won't sugarcoat it. Getting legislation passed is going to be tough. There are powerful interests invested in keeping things the way they are." "I know," Sarah replied, her tone unwavering. "But if we don't try, nothing will ever change. And honestly, Senator, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that happens." Hayes smiled faintly, clearly moved by Sarah's determination. "All right then," she said. "Let's get to work." In addition to lobbying lawmakers, Sarah collaborated closely with advocacy groups to organize public events designed to keep the conversation alive. One such event, a town hall discussion held in Washington, D.C., drew hundreds of attendees, ranging from activists and community leaders to concerned citizens eager to learn more about the issue. Standing on stage alongside prominent figures in the fight against racial profiling, Sarah spoke passionately about the importance of accountability and transparency within law enforcement. "We can't ignore the fact that these incidents happen every single day," she told the audience, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "And while I'm grateful for the support my story has received, I want to remind everyone that I'm not the exception. I'm one of many. The question isn't whether we should act, it's how quickly we can act to prevent others from suffering the same fate." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the auditorium. For Sarah, the moment was bittersweet. On one hand, she was heartened by the overwhelming response. On the other, she couldn't shake the knowledge that there were still so many battles left to fight. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah's efforts began yielding tangible results. Lawmakers introduced new bills aimed at addressing racial profiling and increasing police accountability. Advocacy groups reported a surge in donations and volunteer sign-ups, enabling them to expand their reach and impact. Even some police departments started revisiting their training protocols, incorporating modules on implicit bias and cultural sensitivity. Yet, despite these victories, Sarah remained acutely aware of the challenges ahead. Progress was slow, uneven, and often met with fierce opposition. In some areas, attempts to implement reforms faced stiff resistance from local governments and unions. Critics continued to attack Sarah personally, accusing her of exploiting her position for political gain. At times, the constant scrutiny felt suffocating, leaving her questioning whether she was truly making a difference. It was during one of these low points that Agent Marks approached her with unexpected news. "I think we've found something. That might help," he said cautiously, handing her a folder marked confidential. Inside were documents detailing patterns of misconduct within certain police departments, including instances where officers had targeted individuals based solely on race. "This isn't definitive proof," Marks explained, "but it's enough to start asking questions. If we release it strategically, it could put additional pressure on those resisting change." Sarah flipped through the pages, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly. "Releasing classified information, even indirectly, is risky." Marks nodded grimly. "I know, but if we play our cards right, the risk could pay off. Besides, isn't that what you've been fighting for? To expose the truth, no matter the cost?" Sarah hesitated for only a moment before closing the folder. "Yes," she said firmly. "Let's do it." With Marks's guidance, Sarah worked with trusted allies to leak the documents, anonymously to investigative journalists. Within days, major news organizations published exposés revealing the extent of systemic bias within law enforcement agencies. Public outrage reached new heights, forcing reluctant officials to take action. Protests erupted nationwide, demanding immediate reforms. Even politicians who had previously resisted change found themselves under intense pressure to act. Through it all, Sarah maintained her composure, though privately, she struggled with the toll the campaign was taking on her. Late nights spent strategizing, endless phone calls with advocates, and the constant barrage of criticism left her physically and emotionally drained. Yet whenever doubt crept in, she reminded herself of the faces she'd seen at the town hall. The hope in their eyes, the gratitude in their voices. They were counting on her, and she couldn't afford to give up now. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Sarah returned home to find a letter waiting for her on the kitchen counter. It was handwritten, the envelope addressed simply, "To Ms. Johnson." Curious, she opened it and began reading. The note was from a young woman named Maya, who described how Sarah's courage had inspired her to speak out about her own experiences with racial profiling. "Before I read your story," Maya wrote, "I thought I was alone. Now I know I'm part of something bigger. Thank you for giving me, and so many others, hope." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she reread the letter. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel a sense of pride, not for what she had accomplished, but for the ripple effect her actions had created. Change was messy, imperfect, and painfully slow. But it was happening, and that, she realized, was worth every sleepless night, every harsh word, every ounce of energy she had poured into the fight. As she tucked the letter safely away, Sarah glanced out the window at the city skyline. The lights twinkled like stars, each one representing a dream, a struggle, a story waiting to be told. Somewhere out there, people were rising up, demanding justice, refusing to stay silent. And Sarah knew she would stand with them for as long as it took. Months had passed since Sarah's op-ed first ignited a national conversation, and the landscape of accountability and reform was beginning to shift, albeit slowly. While progress was uneven, with some regions embracing change and others resisting fiercely, the momentum Sarah had sparked showed no signs of slowing down. For her part, Sarah remained deeply entrenched in the fight, balancing her dual roles as both a covert operative and an advocate for justice. The weight of it all often left her exhausted, but she found strength in the growing movement around her. One crisp autumn morning, Sarah received a summons to testify before Congress. It wasn't entirely unexpected. Her story had become emblematic of the broader struggle against racial profiling. But the invitation still sent a shiver down her spine. Testifying publicly meant exposing herself to even greater scrutiny, not just from critics, but potentially from adversaries within the intelligence community who might view her actions as overstepping boundaries. Yet, when Agent Marks delivered the news, Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'll do it," she said firmly, her voice leaving no room for doubt. The day of the hearing arrived, and Sarah stood outside the Capitol building, taking a moment to steady herself. She wore a simple navy blue suit, her posture confident yet approachable. Reporters swarmed the entrance, shouting questions and snapping photos, but Sarah ignored them, focusing instead on the task ahead. Inside, the chamber buzzed with anticipation. Senators and representatives sat at their desks, pens poised over notebooks, while members of the public filled the gallery above. When Sarah took the stand, the room fell silent. She began by recounting her experience during the traffic stop. The fear, the frustration, the realization that she was being judged not by her actions but by preconceived notions about who she was. Her words were measured, her tone calm but impassioned. "What happened to me isn't unique," she explained. "It's something millions of people face every single day. The difference is that I have a platform and a responsibility to speak up." As she spoke, Sarah noticed the expressions of those listening shift subtly. Some senators nodded in agreement. Others scribbled notes furiously. When she finished her prepared statement, the floor opened for questions. One senator asked how law enforcement could better address implicit bias. Another pressed her on whether federal oversight was necessary. Each question required careful navigation, blending personal insight with policy recommendations. By the time the hearing concluded, there was a palpable sense that something significant had occurred, not just politically but culturally. In the days following her testimony, the ripple effects were undeniable. Media coverage intensified, with pundits debating the implications of Sarah's remarks. Lawmakers cited her words during debates, using them to bolster arguments for reform. Advocacy groups seized the opportunity to amplify their efforts, organizing rallies and petitions demanding action. Even within the CIA, whispers circulated about Sarah's courage, a rare acknowledgement of someone willing to challenge the status quo. But alongside the praise came renewed hostility. Critics doubled down on their attacks, labeling Sarah a traitor for leveraging classified information to push for change. Anonymous threats poured in, forcing her security detail to increase its vigilance. Despite the danger, Sarah refused to retreat. "If they're coming after me," she told Agent Marks one evening, "then we must be doing something right." Marks chuckled grimly. "You've got guts, Johnson, but don't underestimate the risks. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about everyone looking to you for leadership." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. Still, she couldn't ignore the growing network of allies rallying behind her cause. From grassroots activists to high-profile celebrities, people from all walks of life were joining forces to demand justice. Together, they formed a coalition unlike anything Sarah had ever seen, a diverse tapestry of voices united by a shared vision of equality and fairness. One particularly transformative moment came during a nationwide march organized by advocacy groups. Thousands gathered in cities across the country, carrying banners emblazoned with messages like "End racial profiling" and "Justice without bias." In Washington, D.C., Sarah joined the crowd, standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers, who now felt like family. As speakers took turns addressing the sea of faces, Sarah listened intently, moved by the stories shared and the resilience displayed. When it was her turn to speak, the crowd erupted into applause. Sarah stepped forward, gripping the microphone tightly. "This isn't just my fight," she began, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "It's ours. Every person here today has a story worth telling, a truth worth sharing. And together, we are proving that silence is no longer an option." Her speech electrified the audience, igniting chants and cheers that echoed through the streets. For Sarah, the moment crystallized everything she had been working toward: unity, empowerment, and hope. Change was messy and imperfect, but it was happening, and she was proud to be part of it. Back at headquarters, Sarah continued juggling her responsibilities, ensuring her advocacy work didn't compromise her duties as an operative. It wasn't always easy, but she found ways to integrate her missions with her mission. On assignments abroad, she sought opportunities to engage with marginalized communities, learning firsthand how systemic injustices manifested globally. These experiences reinforced her belief that the fight for justice transcended borders. It was universal. By the end of the year, tangible victories began emerging. Several states passed legislation banning racial profiling and mandating body cameras for law enforcement officers. Federal agencies implemented new training programs focused on bias awareness and de-escalation tactics. Even the Department of Justice launched investigations into departments accused of misconduct, signaling a commitment to accountability. Yet, despite these milestones, Sarah knew the journey was far from over. Systemic change required sustained effort and setbacks were inevitable. But she also recognized that the groundwork laid during this period would endure long after the headlines faded. People were waking up, speaking out, and holding institutions accountable. That alone was reason enough to keep pushing forward. On New Year's Eve, Sarah found herself reflecting on the past 12 months. She sat alone on her balcony, wrapped in a blanket as fireworks lit up the night sky. Her phone buzzed occasionally with messages from friends and colleagues wishing her well, but she let them wait, savoring the quiet solitude. For once, she allowed herself to feel a sense of accomplishment, not because she had achieved perfection, but because she had made a difference. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Opening the door, she found Agent Mark standing there holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use some company," he said with a smile. Sarah laughed softly, stepping aside to let him in. They spent the next hour talking about the challenges ahead, the lessons learned, and the victories yet to come. As midnight approached, Marks raised his cup in a toast. "To another year of fighting the good fight," he said warmly. Sarah clinked her cup against his, smiling despite the uncertainty looming on the horizon. "Here's to hope," she replied simply. And as the clock struck 12, ushering in a new year, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with obstacles and sacrifices. But she was ready. Because in a world filled with shadows, she had chosen to bring light, and she wouldn't stop until justice prevailed for everyone.